1 year and 3 days after the release of Elden Ring, From Software has announced they are currently working on the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. All we have is the image of who, unless a major plot twist occurs, is definitely Miquella riding Torrent or a similar steed. In the distance there are 2 trees, the Haligtree and the Erdtree. The Haligtree whirls around the Erdtree in a mortal embrace which makes it bleed golden. But something doesn't click, does it? In fact, the Erdtree still stands in the same world where the Haligtree exists, and we know that the Haligtree has been grown quite far from the Erdtree. So, how could it be that they are in the same exact place? Lance McDonald uncovered the cut content about Miquella and his power over sleep and dreams. Doing the math, there's a high chance that the DLC will be set in Miquella's dream. We already enter a dream in Elden Ring, the deathbed dream to fight 40 sucks. The dream setting would explain why we see an Erdtree snapped in half, and why the Haligtree is in a different location. A dream in Miquella has a parallel with Griffith from Berserk, which has always been an abundant pool of inspiration for the Soulsborne games. Just like the horribly torn and disfigured Griffith who dreams of being great again, Miquella has been turned into a grotesque shadow of his past being, and dreams of what he wants to achieve. Miquella realized the Erdtree couldn't save him and his sister Malenia from the curses afflicting them, so he grew the Haligtree. The Haligtree strangling the Erdtree to death might represent Miquella's disillusion with the greater will and his desire of building something to replace it with. But reality is different from the truth. The Haligtree failed to grow as intended, maybe because Miquella's powers weren't strong enough, or maybe because Mohg kidnapped him before the tree's completion. Hence, the Haligtree is only a mere shadow of the Erdtree, a shadow of what it was meant to become. And in the dream, Miquella sees the realization of his plan, a delusion. The presence of Torrent, or a creature of his same race, can make us hope there will be bits of information connected to other characters. In fact, Torrent is definitely connected to the ancestor spirits in Nokron, which is where Miquella's body is currently held. This means the real world is probably influencing his dream, explaining the presence of the steed. Who knows? Maybe Miquella was one of the previous owners of Torrent, if not the owner Ranni refers to when she comes to us in the Church of Ele. This would imply that Miquella left Torrent to Melina, creating thus a connection between them. In my previous video on the DLC, I said that one viable option was the Glow-Eyed Queen, who might or might not be Melina. Whether she is or not, I suppose we all agree we need to know more about Melina. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Something may come out from the DLC. The content of the DLC, of course, still has a vast room for speculation. After all, we only have a picture and a title so far. Now on to the game lifespan and gameplay. Elden Ring requires quite a lot of hours to be completed and even more to reach a 100% completion. My expectation of the DLC length is between 15 and 20 hours, like an average game. Think about Blood and Wine, The Witcher 3 expansion. It's such a complex and long game that if it had been released under the name The Witcher 4 and not as a DLC, no one would have probably batted an eye. So the basics I personally seek in Shadow of the Erdtree are consistent length and new enjoyable content. I expect an open world area as big as Liurnia, with a few minor but lore-wise interesting dungeons, not more than 2 or 3 field bosses, and 2 legacy dungeons as enjoyable to explore as Stormvale and Leyndell. Quality over quantity, and no repetition of minor bosses and mobs. The field enemies in the DLC could be the following: Wandering Souls lost in the dream, Albinorics and blood-related enemies, because of Mohg's influence, Oracle and Boys, as we find them in Leyndell but also in the Haligtree, Malenia's Knights, maybe guarding the most interesting secrets in the dream. A new game calls for new NPCs, and I expect to have Malenia as an NPC with her own quest. This Malenia, of course, wouldn't be the real one, but Miquella's projection of her sister. Many of us believed that Millicent was actually Malenia, and I personally wouldn't mind interacting with the blade of Miquella without her trying to slice me up. The twins are Empyreans, so there is a high chance to see Miquella and or Malenia's shadow-bound beast, either as an NPC like Blythe, or a boss like Maliketh, or even as both. I suppose that at the end of the DLC, Miquella's rune awaits us, maybe as a reward from him, or dropped after killing him in battle. We can't say yet if Miquella himself will be a boss or the final boss of the DLC. How will we enter the DLC? Elden Ring has a very few places that every player is bound to visit, especially in the first half of the game. My guess is that an NPC will spawn somewhere, probably the Round Hole table, after you have either acquired 2 great runes or defeated Morgoth, which correspond with the first 2 major plot points of the game. We might be thrown directly into the DLC like it happens in Dark Souls 3 when we touch the scrap of painting that leads us to Ariandel. Or we might need to go somewhere with a newly acquired object, as we do in Bloodborne when approaching the amygdala after having acquired the eye of a blood-drunk hunter. If it's the latter case, the statue of Miquella and Malenia in Altus Plateau could be a viable access point. Even if the egg in the Mohg Sanctuary in Nokron is placed after one of the most difficult bosses in the game, probably it will be the finishing point of Miquella's story. Wrapping DLCs up never really corresponds with killing the final boss. The Shadow of the Erdtree will maybe show us how Miquella has created the Haligtree. Miquella might be the one who asks us to do certain quests, like retrieving some items to help him in the task. But looking at the Haligtree devouring the Erdtree, I wonder if the DLC will show us the shape of the world Miquella imagined for him and his sister to live in. A world unfortunately distorted by Mohg's corruption. We would make our way throughout the dream to find a Miquella drunk on blood and put an end to his misery, and the one who asks us to do so might be the Malenia of the dream, who despite being a projection feels the shadow of the real love the sister had for her brother. We probably won't see the DLC any soon. I'm convinced that we'll get a trailer only after the release of Armored Core 6, sometime in 2023. After that, From Software will be able to work at full capacity on the DLC. Whatever the Shadow of the Erdtree will bring us, we can sleep peacefully tonight. Miquella might be dreaming, but we aren't. We will have at least one Elden Ring DLC.